Okay, good morning. So let us get started with today's class. So in today's class, we would have two parts. The first part, which I hope to finish in the next 1 hour, 1 hour roughly, is a technical part, associated with continuing our discussion on control of dynamic systems. And the second part is the discussion on the solutions to the problems that were given during the midterm. So let me just a moment. Let me just share my screen. Can you guys see my sheet of paper? Hello. Can one
Yes,
of you?
sir.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So the topic for today's lecture is let me put it this way: feedback control of dynamic systems. So the previous lecture was titled Control of Dynamic Systems, and this one is titled Feedback Control of Dynamic Systems. And we already started to talk about the significance of this notion of feedback in the previous lecture. Let us explore that in greater detail in today's lecture in the context of controlling a dynamic system. Okay, so let us first recap what we discussed. We first started off by taking a specific example of a pendulum and solved the state equation. So we did that for a certain set of initial conditions, and the solution that we got was exactly what we would have expected. I think it was a regular pendulum, and we expected a sinusoidal response in the vicinity of its equilibrium point. So the angle theta changes sinusoidally as function of time if the pendulum is released from some initial position theta naught and with no initial velocity. And that's precisely what our formal approach to solving the problem also gave us. Then we talked about the significance of stable and unstable systems. And then we started to talk about control. Okay, so we gave the example of a 2R manipulator, and we discussed what path planning was. So path planning is the path that you want your end effector to take, both in space as well as in time. Okay, so how do you want the xyz Cartesian coordinates of your end effector to change as function of time, is what path planning is all about. And once you have that information, then you want to command your joints to actually change the joint variables in such a way that the end effector's position changes as prescribed by the path planning algorithm. Okay, so this path planning gave us the desired set of states. Okay, which we called as xd of t. So this set of states are the vector of joint positions and joint velocities that were desired by us as control engineers for this robotic manipulator to discharge its duty, to discharge its function, pick up something and place it somewhere else, or whatever else it might be doing. Okay, so we wanted this motion to happen, and we first explored fairly straightforward approaches to doing this, and using what is called as open loop control. So why open loop? It becomes clear when we discuss feedback. Okay, so we first decided that you will give such a ud that if the states are already on xt at time t equal to 0, then what ud should I apply so that they continue to stay on, continue to assume values xd of t. So we saw that this was of the kind b21 inverse of xd dot minus a21 x1d minus a22. So this is x2d dot, I think, a22 x2d. So this was the kind of input that we needed. And then we saw that if you applied this input, the error E between the actual states x and the desired states xd, okay, the error E had this particular dynamics. E dot was equal to A times E. Okay. In other words, the error actually either grew up or uh, reduced as function of time depending on the eigenvalues of the matrix A. So the solution, as we discussed, was E of t is exponential of at E of 0, E at time t equal to 0. This is a solution to this equation. And this exponential at can either have increasing exponentials or decreasing exponentials depending on the sign of its eigenvalues. Okay, and those eigenvalues we call them the poles of that matrix. Okay, so we discovered that while this solution to controlling a physical system to a mechanical system was definitely a valid one for a stable system, because even though my initial positions and initial velocities are not exactly what I want them to be as per my path planning team's prescription, I know that if I wait long enough, I will be able to get them to be close to xd, because error E will go to 0 if I wait long enough, and then I will be able to track xd for all future time. Okay, this was clear to me. However, there was a real problem when it came to unstable systems, in which case this error actually tended to increase with time, and there was nothing more that we could do if we chose to adopt this particular strategy. And we took the example of an inverted pendulum to showcase this problem. So we took this inverted pendulum whose dynamics was given by theta double dot minus g by L theta is equal to tau. Okay, and we noticed that if we give tau d as just theta desired double dot minus g by L theta desired, then we are going to be left with an unstable error dynamics. Okay, so in other words, theta E double dot minus g by L theta E will be equal to 0. So if I have some initial error and initial velocity error and position error, that error will only grow with time, because this has the roots of the characteristic equation for this particular differential equation. One of them is positive root g by L, the other is negative minus root g by L. That positive root g by L results in an exponentially increasing trend. Okay, so there was no way around if we were stuck with open loop control. But at this point, we discovered that instead of just accepting our fate the way it was, let us try to do something more. In particular, if we are able to measure the output of this pendulum, so we have this pendulum, inverted pendulum, and then let us say we are able to measure that angle theta in real time by means of some sensor. That's a very important requirement. Okay, if I'm able to measure it, then in addition to generating a torque that is proportional to this particular term here, again, the torque can also be generated by us because it's in our control. We are going to be usually using a motor of some kind. I can control the input voltage to that motor, and through that I can control the torque that the motor will apply. Okay, so this is under my control. Now, as long as it is under my control, I might as well try to add an extra term here, which I call K1 times theta minus theta desired. Okay, when we did that, we saw that what was an unstable system became a marginally stable system. And then if we went one step further, okay, and we added, let us say, call this K2 and K1 times theta dot minus theta d dot, something that is proportional to the error between the actual value of theta dot and the desired velocity theta dot d, then the overall error dynamics in this particular case, it looked something like this: E dot plus K1E plus K2 minus G by L times E is equal to 0. So by choosing K1 and K2 judiciously, I could make the error dynamic stable to whatever extent I wanted. Okay, so I can have whatever roots for this characteristic equation that I desire by appropriately choosing the constants K1 and K2. Okay, and we then generalize this to the a higher order dynamic system, albeit still a linear one. So we had x dot is equal to ax plus bu, For a while, we decided we will not focus on a tracking problem. In other words, getting the the system to do our bidding, but instead we will only try to get x to go to 0. Okay, x to demonstrate stable dynamics, even though the eigenvalues of A may not be stable. Okay, in other words, even though the eigenvalues of A might be on the right half of the complex plane. Okay, so how do we do that? We discovered that if you choose to provide this kind of a feedback, u is equal to minus k times x, then we saw that the error dynamics which follows this or x, the dynamics of x itself, since we are now not trying to track anything and therefore we don't have to talk in terms of error, we just want to stabilize this system about its equilibrium point, which is x equal to 0. So this will become x dot is equal to a minus bk times x. Okay, so whether if we were trying to track something, x gets replaced by that symbol e, and you get the error dynamics to be this. And by choosing k appropriately, we can ensure that the the eigenvalues, the eigenvalues of this particular matrix A minus Bk are placed wherever we want them to be placed. So lambda 1 naught, lambda 2 naught, I can specify. I'll have n eigenvalues for this matrix, right? So I can specify exactly what these values have to be and choose such values of the gain k that these values, the closed loop system has these particular eigenvalues. Okay, so this approach to stabilizing a dynamic system is called pole placement. Not just stabilizing, but achieving the desired performance in terms of decay of transients. Pole placements. Pole placement. Okay. So let us take a concrete example. But before I do that, I'll just draw a simple block diagram to Subhadip Sahu has a question.
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir. Sir,
yeah, good morning.
In the sixth point, sir, what we are doing, actually I could not understand. 6th point.
Pardon me?
Sir, the 6th point you have written, x dot equals to ax plus bu. Then after that, what we are doing, I'm unable to understand.
We are trying to stabilize the C. Let us say x dot is equal to ax plus bu represents an unstable system. For example, if I were to cast the differential equation for the pendulum and the inverted pendulum in the state space form, you agree with me that matrix A has one of its eigenvalues on the right half of the complex plane, or in other words, it has a positive eigenvalue, right? So this then represents an unstable system, right? Because if I leave it with some initial conditions, those the response simply grows as function of time. But let us say I want to stabilize that system, this inverted pendulum. I want that theta equal to 0 point, which is the equilibrium point for the inverted pendulum. Let us say I want it to be stable. How do I stabilize it? Then I measure that angle theta and the velocity theta dot, and I provide a feedback signal which is proportional to theta and theta dot. That's what this essentially is saying. Okay, if I do that, then the overall dynamics of our system is no longer governed by x dot is equal to ax, but of the kind x dot is equal to a minus b times bkx. Now, if I have this as the new dynamics, then by choosing this k, the elements of the vector k appropriately, instead of the overall dynamics being unstable, I can make sure that they're stable. That is the advantage of using state feedback. Okay, I have taken the states and fed them back. That's what I'm doing here. So state feedback helps me to stabilize the system. Okay.
Yes, sir. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So let us briefly take a look at the block diagram of the system. So we often in systems theory we represent systems by block diagrams because it doesn't matter ultimately what the physical construction of a system is. We are only concerned about its mathematical structure, what differential equation it has. Okay, so in our case, so we have our system, the dynamic system. The input to that is u. Okay, and the output of that is x. And the internal dynamics is x dot is equal to ax plus bu. Okay. Now, what we are doing is, ordinarily, let us say you want this to x to be equal to xd, what would you do? You would apply ud, which is given by b inverse of whatever xd dot minus a times xd, something like this would probably be applied. Okay, so that is the desired input that you would apply in open loop control, and you hope to get the desired output xd. But of course, you will never get the desired output if your system is unstable. If your system is stable, after some time, as we discussed, applying this kind of input is not harmful. You will end up getting the response you want, but you have to wait some time, but you have no control over the time for which you have to wait. It's all decided by the roots of the characteristic equation, or the the zeros of the eigenvalues of the matrix A. Okay, but suppose you are stuck with an unstable system, you are in real trouble, as we discussed in the case of the inverted pendulum. So what we do there is we take this state x, multiply it with a certain vector k, and then compare it with the desired states xd. That's what we did. So this is minus and this is plus, and what I get at the out of this comparator in some sense is x minus xd. Okay, of course I've got the signs wrong, so maybe something like this. Okay, and then I add that to the original desired input that I would want to apply. So this is to correct for that error. So u desired, I add that and then provide that to my system. So this is what I'm doing when I write ud, or u is equal to b inverse of xd dot minus a times xd, and then I add some other terms, right? Minus k1 times x1 minus x2, etc., etc. That's precisely what I'm doing here. I'm adding those feedback terms that are proportional to x minus xd to the desired input u, and then I'm feeding that. And what happens then is that this ud tries to get the system to go to xd. But if the system is unstable, this feedback loop here stabilizes the error dynamics and ensures that as time progresses, x actually ends up becoming arbitrarily close to xd. Okay, so this is a very revolutionary way of getting a dynamic system to do your bidding, and this is called as feedback control. So central to controlling a dynamic system by means of feedback is the need of a sensor. It is not indicated here, but the fact that you are able to tap into these states. What are these states? They are just joint positions and joint velocities. The fact that you're able to tap into them in real time means that there is a sensor there. So sensor is central to implementation of feedback control. Now you begin to appreciate why the previous technique of just applying an input that is dependent only on the desired response, why is that called open loop control? So here you see there's a loop that is set up because of feeding back the signal. Okay, so when there is no feedback that is provided, then there is no loop here, and that's why it's called open loop. Okay, so the first technique is called open loop because you are not feeding back, you are not using the information that you obtain from your sensors and appropriately modify the input to your physical system. You are not doing that. Okay, in that case it's it's called open loop control. On the other hand, if you do it, then it's called feedback control. Okay, and the usefulness of feedback control was obvious through the example that we considered in the previous lecture. Now let us come back to this example of the inverted pendulum to showcase this pole placement idea. Okay, Dinesh Kumar has a question.
Good morning, sir. Sir, in open loop, there is no need any sensor something. Na? Only through mathematics we are going to control. But in closed loop, only we need sensor and full feedback, everything. Na, sir?
Absolutely correct.
Okay, sir.
Right. That's the main difference. Okay, so you have a sensor which converts that physical variable, whether it is position, joint angle, or joint velocity, or whatever, into a voltage. That voltage is acquired these days by means of a computer, and then you compute this difference between the desired state and the actual state, and then you generate what is known as a control effort. Okay, or you generate another voltage which is proportional to this difference, which is basically this k times x minus xt, and you provide it to those joint motors, the motors at the joints, so that they can actuate those joints in the appropriate manner and stabilize the overall dynamics. Okay. So let us take this, let us just solve an example to showcase this idea of pole placement. Okay. So theta double dot minus g by L theta is equal to tau. This is the dynamic equation of an inverted pendulum. Let us say, for the sake of simplicity, I approximate g to be equal to 10 meters per second square and L to be 1 meter, just so that I get good looking numbers. And let us say I want the closed loop poles. Okay. So when I say closed loop poles, I'm referring to the poles of the overall system after the feedback, after feedback has been wrapped around my physical system, and that's going to be A minus Pk essentially. Okay, closed loop pole should be at minus 10 and minus 20. Let us say that's what is desired. Okay, so I want my dynamics to be governed by terms of the kind e to the power minus 10t and e to the power minus 20t. Okay, that's the kind of modes that should be there that govern the error dynamics of my system. Okay, whereas right now, since G and L, G is 10, let me make G 9, because we'll take the square root sometime. Okay, 9 meters per second square. So you will have one pole at minus 3 and one pole at plus 3. Square root of G by L, and other is in minus square root of G by L. Okay, so you see that right now the modes are of the kind e to the power plus 3t and e to the power minus 3t. And this guy, of course, will faithfully go to 0 after some time, but this fellow will keep building up as function of time. Okay, so this is a dangerous system. It's an unstable system. Okay, I cannot get it to track something in open loop because of this term. So what I want to do now is therefore wrap a feedback loop around this and get the modes of response to look something like this. Okay, any questions about what I wish to do as an engineer and the kind of plant that I'm stuck with, on which I have to get this to happen? Okay, so now let us implement pole placement. So let us define x1 as theta, x2 as theta dot, so that I will have x1, x2 dot is equal to 0, 1 G by L 0 times x1, x2. Okay, I should be consistent with the kind of bracket I'm using, plus 0, 1 tau. I will not use tau here because in control systems literature, generally the symbol U is used as an input. It doesn't matter because as I said, whether I'm dealing with an inverted pendulum or some other electrical circuit which has the same mathematical expression, the solutions, the approach that I need to follow would be the same. So all that matters to me is the mathematical structure of that input-output relationship. Okay, so U is the general symbol that is used for an input. In our case, it will be a motor which can apply a certain torque tau. Okay, so we to get this to have these particular poles, we apply state feedback. So U is equal to minus K1, K2 times x1, x2. Okay, we apply that feedback so that we get the dynamics to be equal to x1 dot, x2 dot is equal to 0, 1 G by L 0 x1, x2 plus or minus 0, 1 times K1, K2 times x1, x2. Okay, so this is a 1 by this is a 2 by 1 vector, and that's a 1 by 2 vector. So when I multiply them, I get a 2 by 2 matrix. Okay, so this will be, this is a A matrix, this is the B vector, and that's the K vector. Okay, so this will be 0, 1 G by L 0 minus here I'll get 0, 0 K1, K2 this whole thing times x1, x2. And that's the dynamics. x1 dot, x2 dot. And this is basically A minus BK. Okay, this part here. So let me simplify that a little bit. So I would get the dynamics to be x1, x2 dot is equal to 0, 1, G by L minus K1 minus K2 times x1, x2. Okay, I want to stabilize my inverted pendulum about that equilibrium position. Okay, I don't want that position to be unstable. And I want it to be stabilized by a precise desired extent. You know, the pole should be at -10 and -20. Okay, so now I have this equation. Now, what are the poles -10 and -20? They're the roots of the characteristic equation of this new matrix A minus BK. Okay, so how do I, how do I find the characteristic equation? I do determinant of lambda I minus of this matrix A minus BK is equal to 0. Okay, so what is lambda I? So that's a diagonal matrix with entries lambda minus this particular matrix is A minus BK 0, 1, G by L minus K1, K2 minus K2. Determinant of this whole thing has to be equal to 0. So if I do the algebra here, determinant of lambda minus 1, this is K1 minus G by L, this is lambda plus K2 should be equal to 0. Determinant of that matrix should be equal to 0. So lambda times lambda plus K2 plus K1 minus G by L has to be equal to 0. So this is the characteristic equation. So lambda square plus K2 lambda plus K1 minus G by L is equal to 0. So I need to now pick K1 and K2 such that the closed loop poles or the roots of this characteristic equation are at -10 and -20. So lambda, I want my characteristic equation to be of the kind lambda minus lambda 1 times lambda minus lambda 2. Okay, and that should be equal to 0, where lambda 1 is equal to -10, lambda 2 is equal to -20. Okay, so if I expand this here, I get lambda square minus lambda times lambda 1 plus lambda 2 plus lambda 1 lambda 2 is equal to 0. So if I compare this equation with the previous equation, I can use this, compare the coefficients of lambda and a constant coefficient and the constant term here. I can express K1 and K2 in terms of lambda 1 and lambda 2. I would see that K2 has to be equal to lambda 1 minus of lambda 1 plus lambda 2, because the coefficient of lambda here is K2 and here it is lambda 1 minus of lambda 1 plus lambda 2, and then K1 should be equal to K1 minus G by L should be equal to lambda 1 lambda 2. And I know that my lambda 1 and lambda 2 are given to me, so K2 should therefore be equal to 30. Okay, lambda 1 plus lambda 2 times -1, and lambda 1 lambda 2 is 200, so this should be equal to 200. Okay, so K1 therefore has to be equal to 200 plus G by L, which, since we assumed G was equal to 9 meters per second square, K1 has to be equal to 209. The numerical value of K1 would be 209. Okay, this completes the design. Okay, we were able to obtain the desired extent of stability for our dynamic system, starting from an unstable system, one of whose poles was on the right half of the complex plane, as it is usually called, because in the complex plane, this is the left half and that's the right half. And if you have a pole on the right half of the complex plane, then you have an unstable system on your hands. So that was the system that we were given. But by using state feedback, we not only made it a stable system, but we shifted the poles of that stable system so far back that it's extremely stable, far more stable than what it was before. Okay, any questions about this approach? This is called pole placement because I have decided where I want the poles to sit for my overall system. okay, and appropriately chosen the feedback gains K1 and K2 to ensure that that happens. Yeah, Dinesh has a question.
Sir, you have chosen this lambda 1 and lambda 2. They're having some physical relation with that actually.
Yes. So we will talk about that in a minute's time. What is the
Okay.
physical significance of lambda 1 and lambda 2?
Okay.
Okay. So we will get to that. These are called as the poles, as I said. Okay. And these are perhaps the most important quantities in control system, in linear control. Okay. So for the rest of the course, we will be focused only on these quantities. So it's well worth spending some time to understand their significance. Okay. These are called the poles. So if you are talking of just the original dynamic system alone, then there are the plants, that the poles of that particular dynamic system. Otherwise, this could be, if you are using feedback, then there are the poles of A minus BK. So they are called as poles. Why are they called poles? You'll have to wait for some time, but they are called the poles. What is their physical significance? Okay. And why do we focus as control engineers? Why do control engineers focus so intently on the poles of the system? Okay. So what happens if lambda 1, if I have a system with lambda 1 and lambda 2 as the poles, then I know that all its responses, so x is equal to x e to the power at x naught, right? So if x, I look at it as x1, x2, etc., etc., then each of them, let us take just at first, let us take the first scalar term, just x1 alone. I would notice that it will be some linear combination of these poles, ci e to the power lambda it, where ci are some constants whose values are determined by the initial condition. Okay, x2 similarly will be of maybe I'll call it ci1 or something. x2 will be equal to ci2 e to the power lambda it. So you have the response of every single one of the elements of your state vector to be linear combination of these modes e to the power lambda t. Okay. So how do these modes look? Okay, let us just plot them. We have already plotted them once, but suppose we assume that we arrange lambdas, lambda 1, lambda 2, and so on and so forth, such that lambda 1 is the smallest. So magnitude of lambda 1, or maybe real part of lambda 1, is less than the real part of lambda 2, real part of magnitude of lambda 2, or sorry, magnitude of the real part of lambda 1 is less than the magnitude of real part of lambda 2, etc. Because lambda 1, lambda 2 are all negative numbers in general. Okay, let us say we arrange it that way. Then how does e to the power lambda 1t look like? Okay, it will be a decreasing exponential if our system is stable. This will be e to the power lambda 1t. If real part of lambda 1 is less than 0. Okay. Now, what about e to the power lambda 2t if real part of lambda 2 is greater than real part of lambda 1? It will be a decreasing exponential whose rate of decrease is even faster than the first one. And if I have the other eigenvalues, the corresponding modes will decay even faster. Okay, so what is the physical significance, therefore, of this term lambda 1? Do you agree with me that it captures the speed with which this transients, the errors, decay as function of time? So we saw that when we have, so the error dynamics was given by a minus bk times e dot is equal to a minus bk times e. Okay, so the error between the desired way in which I want the states to change and the actual way in which they are changing, they will go to 0 as per these particular terms, e to the power lambda 1t, lambda 2t, and so on. So these lambdas therefore give me two very important pieces of information. First, they'll tell me whether they go to 0 at all or not as function of time. Okay, or in other words, whether my dynamic system will eventually obey my command or not. That's a very important information. If my dynamic system was initially unstable and if some of the lambdas are greater than 0, then I will not get the dynamic system to obey my command. It's an unstable system. Okay, so that's a very important piece of information that I need as a control engineer. whether they will obey my command or not. The second is how quickly will they obey my command? How soon will that error between where they are now and where I want them to be, how soon will that come to zero? Okay, that information is also captured by these lambdas. Okay, so if you see here, all of these are decaying. If lambda 2 is greater than lambda 1 and so on and so forth, then the corresponding exponentials e to the power lambda 2t and lambda 3t and so on will decay much faster than e power lambda 1t. Okay, so the time it takes for, yes.
Sir, your voice was breaking in between.
Okay.
I could not hear for 1 minute earlier.
Okay, so what I was saying was these modes, the eigenvalues lambda 1 to lambda n contain two important pieces of information. First, that tell me whether my dynamic system will obey me or not. Okay, because if one of these lambdas is the real part is not less than 0, then the error associated with that will increase as function of time. Or in other words, my dynamic system will disobey me in some sense. It will go off in its own particular direction. It will not follow the trajectory that I prescribe it to follow. That's one important piece of information that is contained in the sign of these sign of the real parts of these lambdas. Okay. The second important piece of information is how quickly will our dynamic system follow my command. Okay. If lambda is very large, then you see that lambda t is going to be a very large number, and therefore, since lambda is a negative number, a negative large number, this will decay very quickly. Okay, so the larger the lambda that I pick, the faster will be the error dynamics, or in other words, the error will settle down to 0 much faster. And as a consequence, my dynamic system will obey my command very fast. On the other hand, if lambda is very slow, lambda is very small, then it takes a long time for the error to come to 0. And therefore, my dynamic system will obey, but it will take quite some time. So the numerical value of lambda sort of captures the time I need to wait before my system starts to obey my command. Okay, so the time I need to wait, I'll call it t wait, is on the order of 1 by lambda. Okay, now I have a general nth order dynamic system has n lambdas. So when I say 1 by lambda, which lambda am I talking about here? Okay, so to understand that, we see that if we order the lambdas in this particular sequence, we can do this without any loss of generality. Okay, I can choose lambda 1 to have the smallest real part, lambda 2 to have the next larger real part, and so on in magnitude. Then the mode corresponding to lambda 1 will decay at a certain rate. The mode corresponding to lambda 2 will decay at a faster rate. Lambda 3 will even faster. So the time that I need to wait for my dynamic system to obey my command is going to be dominated by the slowest mode. Do you guys agree with me? It's going to be lambda 1 that's going to determine how long I need to wait before my system obeys me. Because all other fellows will fall, the errors will fall to 0 very quickly. This guy, however, will persist. Okay, so the waiting time is therefore on the order of 1 by magnitude of real part of lambda 1, assuming that lambda 1 is the smallest, has the smallest real part. And this pole, lambda 1, is called as a dominant pole. Okay, so we actually never write down these expressions e to the power lambda t and so on and so forth, because we are not really interested in that error. You see, as a control engineer, error is something that I have to live with. Okay, it's an unpleasant reality that I have to accommodate. It is not something that I desire, but I want to know how quickly will that error between wherever my manipulator is now and wherever I desire it to be now, how quickly will that error disappear as function of time. Okay, whether it disappears at all, and if so, how quickly does it disappear. Both those pieces of information are contained in these poles of the system. Okay, if the poles all have negative real parts, then I'm guaranteed that my system will eventually obey my command. Okay, whatever trajectory I want my robot to follow, it will follow that. Okay, but suppose it is not following as fast as I want it to follow. Okay, In other words, I want the robot to pick up a part and place it somewhere, and I want to do it quite fast. I want it to do it quite fast. Okay, but let us say lambda is very, very small. Okay, then that error will persist over that entire duration when I'm picking up some object and placing it at some other location. So I wouldn't like that situation. So in such a case, I need to choose my lambda to be large enough that very quickly, well before I am midway into my pick and place operation, the error has come to 0 and my end effector is following the trajectory that I commanded it to follow. Okay, so these are two very important pieces of information, whether it will follow or not, and if so, how soon will it follow. They are both contained in the roots of the characteristic equation. In particular, the pole which is closest to the imaginary axis. Okay, if I were to locate lambda 1, lambda 2, and so on, since the real part of lambda 1 is the smallest, let us say it is here, lambda 2's real part is larger in magnitude compared to lambda 1. So lambda 2 will be there, lambda 3 will be there, etc., etc. What matters as far as the dynamics of the overall system is considered is this particular one, because this is the one that's going to persist the longest. And as a control engineer, if I want this to be fast enough, then I have to make sure that this slowest pole, the dominant pole, is located as far back as I wish for it to be located. Okay. Any questions about this? Okay. So now let us take on a slightly more challenging problem. In fact, it turns out that this approach that I have just outlined to you is not restricted to just linear systems. It can also be applied to the mother of all problems. Those n-link non-linear dynamics problem that we derived in case of multi-body systems. The same simple control strategy can also be applied there. And we have come so close that it will be, yes, Dinesh has a question.
Sir, here linear system, non-linear system, sir, what is the term that is defining, sir? Can you just explain?
So it is you have to look at a differential equation. So x dot is equal to ax plus bu is a linear system if a and b are not functions of the state x, roughly, to put it very crudely. Okay. Otherwise, it's a non-linear system. So if you saw our equation for the multi-body system, it was of the kind x1 dot is equal to x2, x2 dot is equal to m of x1 inverse times the input tau minus c of x1 x2 times x2 minus g of x1. Okay, you see here that these terms here are involve products of x1 and x2 and so on. Okay, whereas here there are no such terms. They are just the matrix A here is a constant matrix. It's independent of x. Matrix B is also constant. That's why this is considered a linear system. A more formal definition of linearity is based on what is known as homogeneity and superposition. I talked about that a couple of lectures back. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So roughly you have to look at a differential equation. If the differential equation has terms like x1, x2, x1 square, x2 square, and so on, that's a nonlinear system. By inspection, you can say. Okay. But formally, something that obeys superposition and scaling is what is defined as a linear system. Okay. So let us now try to generalize this to the more challenging case of the actual multi-body system. It turns out that it is possible to do it. Okay. The same principles that we used here can be extended to that multi-body dynamic problem. And I don't need to underscore to you how ugly and complicated the forward dynamics of a multi-body, of a 2R manipulator looked. Right. I have expanded that out in all its glory in one of the lectures. And you could see how many confusing terms there were in the expressions for the mass matrix and in the expression for the Coriolis term and the centrifugal term and so on and so forth. But even a manipulator which is that complicated can be easily controlled. So with surprising ease, you can control it by using the ideas that we have presented here. So let us first, before we do that, let us first do it for the case of a simple inverted pendulum. Okay, theta double dot minus g by L. Instead of linearizing it about its equilibrium point, let me put the actual expression g by L sine theta itself. Okay, is equal to tau. Now I want theta to change as some particular, I want theta to change according to theta d of t. So this is how I want it to dance as function of time. Angle theta should change. It should be this particular value at this instant, a different value at another instant. This is a dream of the control engineer or a roboticist, right? I want my end effector to move the way I desire it to move, or I command it to move. So this is what I want. How do I accomplish this? Okay, we discovered that open loop control, where I apply theta d double dot minus g by L theta d. This was our first attempt, right? That doesn't work in this particular case. Even if I were to introduce the feedback terms as I did before, k1 times theta minus theta dot minus theta d dot minus k2 times theta minus theta d. If I introduce this as my torque tau, will this at least solve the problem? Let us see. I'll write theta double dot minus g by L sine theta is equal to theta d double dot minus g by L theta d minus k times E dot, or maybe theta E dot minus k1 times this, k2 times theta E. Okay, when I send it to the other side, I get theta double dot minus theta d double dot is theta E double dot. Okay, minus k1 times theta E dot minus k2 times, sorry, plus k2 times theta E. Okay, then I'll be left with these two terms, plus g by L times theta d minus sine theta is equal to 0. And I don't know what I can do with this term. See, if it was just these two terms, this is like a mass spring damper system, the familiar dynamics that we derived earlier. Okay, and then by choosing k1 and k2 to both be greater than 0, I can ensure that theta E dynamics is stable and theta E will go to 0, or in other words, theta will go to theta d as time t tends to infinity. Okay, but because I have this extra term, which is a nonlinear function of theta, I cannot do that. Okay, so it seems as though I'm stuck at some level, right? It turns out that this stalemate situation is a short-lived one. All we need to do is slightly modify the kind of torque that we apply, and in a minute we will be able to apply the same strategy as we have done so far for a linear system also to this nonlinear system. We have nonlinear system because you have sine theta here instead of theta. Okay, so let us do that. Let us say instead of choosing tau to be of this particular form, I choose it to be theta d double dot. Okay, then instead of putting minus g by L theta d, let us say I put minus g by L theta sine theta itself. Anyway, I'm measuring theta. If I'm measuring theta and I'm acquiring with a computer, I can use that same computer to compute sine theta. And now therefore I can generate a voltage that is proportional to sine theta and apply that to my motor, which generates an appropriate torque, which is proportional to sine theta, right? So this is possible. So let us say I do that. And then I also have the other terms. I retain the other terms, theta E dot minus k2 theta E. Let us say I do that. Then what do I get? Theta double dot minus g by L sine theta is equal to theta d double dot minus g by L sine theta minus k1 theta E dot minus k2 theta E. Okay, so what happens now? I have g by L sine theta. This nonlinear term is represented on both the right hand side and the left hand side, so they get cancelled. Okay, so if I move everything to the left hand side now, I get the dynamics to be theta double dot minus theta d double dot plus k1 times theta E dot plus k2 times theta E is equal to 0. Okay, or theta minus this is nothing but theta E double dot, right, plus k1 theta E dot plus k2 theta E is equal to 0. So what will happen now? If I choose k1 and k2 to be greater than 0, in fact I can do pole placement here. I can choose such a value of k1 and k2 that my error dynamics theta E is like a mass spring damper system, right? The error dynamics dies down as function of time fast enough. So if I choose, as I said, lambda 1 to be minus 10 and lambda 2 to be minus 20, then the smallest of the smaller of the two is minus 10. So in roughly 1/10 of a second, roughly, I will be able to get my system to follow whatever command I provide it. Okay. So therefore, by doing pole placement, I can get the error dynamics to go to 0 at the desired rate, and from that I can make sure that even for that nonlinear system, I will get theta minus theta d to go to 0, or theta goes to theta d in a time scale which is within our control, which is on the order of 1 by lambda 1, 1 by magnitude of real part of lambda 1. Any questions about this? Subhadeep Sahu has a question.
Yes, sir. Why we are taking the input, not tau? Why that input we have taken as a function of theta instead of theta d? That sine theta.
We tried that, right? So what we did earlier was we first took it as let us say I took this as sine theta d. Okay. You want to instead. So let me, if I understand you correctly, here tau is equal to theta d double dot minus g by L sine theta. Instead of sine theta, you want it to be sine theta d, right? Is that what you want?
Yes, sir. So actually, I could not understand that how tau means tau is introduced. It should be function of theta d or something else.
So I have this torque tau, right? I have this inverted pendulum is actuated at the base by means of a motor, which is capable of applying this torque tau. Okay. Now I choose this torque to be a function of the desired angular change and the actual angle at this instant of time in this particular manner. So what is your question now? So how is it introduced? There's a motor here which applies this torque, and that motor torque is within my control. So that torque is generated by a computer, or that voltage to the motor is generated by a computer, and that voltage is this particular number.
No, sir. Actually, my question is what should be the function of tau? Means the function of theta. How the function will be? Will it be like original system, or will it be different from the original system? It can be.
Which one?
Means how the function means how the tau as a function of theta is defined.
How do we define tau as a function of theta? Is it?
Yes, means
so we have already defined it here.
So we have already that first term, theta double dot minus g by L sine theta. So do we have to bound that we have to take the original system function to?
So why did I do this? Roughly, I will tell you why I put minus g by L sine theta. My goal was to cancel the nonlinearity. Okay, so whatever nonlinearity you have on the left hand side had to be cancelled on the right hand side. That was why I applied a torque which was proportional to theta and not theta d. Okay, because on the left hand side I do not have theta d. I only have theta. So to cancel that, I put sine theta here also. But what you will see is that we have a more general approach. If you take a general n-link manipulator, then you will see what the expression for the torque would be in a minute's time. Okay.
Okay, sir.
All right. So let us now solve this problem for a more general case. And in fact, let us take up the mother of all problems, right? We had this extremely intimidating equation, m of x1 times x2 dot, or let me write it in terms of joint variables, m of q times q double dot plus c of q comma q dot times q dot plus g of q is equal to tau. This was the differential equation that was obeyed by my general n-link serial manipulator, right? Now suppose I want my q and q dot to have a certain desired way in which they change as function of time. Okay, qd and q dot d. Suppose there is a certain desired way in which I would like them to change as function of time. How do I get this desired way? I talked about this some time back. So I have an end effector. The end effector has to move from point A to point B in the Cartesian frame in a certain as a certain particular function of time. I want it to accelerate to start with, along each of the coordinates, then maybe move with uniform velocity and then decelerate or whatever. So that's what the path planning team will do. They will tell me how the end effector has to move from point A to point B. Okay. Now, the next step is I will do the inverse kinematics for my manipulator and determine how my joint variables have to change as function of time in order for that end effector to move along that prescribed path. Okay, and that is that QD that I would want my joint angles and joint velocities to assume as function of time, so that my end effector's Cartesian coordinates change exactly the way I want them to change. Okay, now I want my controller, I want my dynamic system to change its generalized coordinates and generalized velocities in this particular manner. How do I do that? What I have under my control is a torque, the joint torques that I apply to each of the joints. Okay. The question then is, what joint torque should I apply so that my joint variables Q and Q dot will track these desired joint variables QD and QD dot? This is the problem. How to get Q dot to be equal to QD dot. Okay, so what tau should I apply? So is this problem, it's a very basic problem, right? Is this clear to you, this problem statement? So I have a manipulator. If you are a roboticist, this is the problem you will confront, right? I want to move something. I know how the joints have to move. What I have control over are the motors at each of the joints. So what torque should I apply to each of the motors so that this moves in this particular manner, right? So let us see how that can be done. So the solution is quite straightforward. So it follows the same arguments. So I will instead now that you have recognized what x1 and x2 are, I will write this back in the original form, m of x1 times x2 dot plus c of x1 x2. So this is x1 x2, right? This is the state vector x times x1 dot or times x2, okay, plus g of x1 is equal to tau. This is the relationship. Okay. Now, suppose I apply torque tau equal to m of x1 times x2 d dot minus k1 e dot minus k2 e, where e is x minus xd. Okay, suppose I apply that. Sorry, e is x1 minus x1d, e dot is x2 minus x2d. Okay, suppose I apply that, then plus I also cancel these Coriolis terms, c of x1 comma x2 times x2 plus g of x1. In other words, the torque that I'm applying on the right hand side has a term that represents the same term on the left hand side. I also have a term that represents the gravity term. Okay, I have the Coriolis and centrifugal term also on the right hand side, as well as the gravity term. Okay, in other words, I'm generating torque which is proportional to these terms. How do I generate torques which are proportional to these terms? Note that the central to my ability to generate such a torque is my knowledge of x1 and x2, because I know what the structure of C is. But the input to this matrix C will be my x1 and x2. Okay, so I need to measure x1 and x2. If I'm able to measure x1 and x2, then I can generate these signals, C times x1 comma x2 times x2 and g of x1. So that I can generate a torque which is of this particular kind. Okay, so suppose I apply this kind of a torque. Okay, then what do I get? I get m of x1 times x2 dot plus c of x1 comma x2 times x2 plus g of x1 is equal to m of x1 times x2d dot minus K1 times E dot minus K2 times E. Okay. Plus whatever this entire thing, x2 times x2 plus g of x1. Now, do you agree with me that whatever I have on the right hand side cancels whatever I have on the left hand side? Okay, so the equation therefore would be that m of x1 times x2 dot is equal to m of x1 times x2d dot, which is a desired way in which the variable x2 has to change as function of time, minus k1 times x2 minus x2d, which is E dot, minus k2 E. Now, m of x1 is an invertible matrix, so if I remove it, I would get x2 dot minus x2d dot plus k1 times E dot minus k2 times E is equal to 0. Now, x2 minus x2d is E dot by definition. So that dot is basically E double dot. E double dot plus k1 E dot plus k2 E is equal to 0. So this is going to be the error dynamics for my n-link manipulator. What is this error? Error is basically x1 minus x1d. The difference between where I want my joint variables to be and where they actually are. Okay, not joint velocities, because joint velocities, if I make the joint variables close to wherever they have to be, close to the desired values, automatically the joint velocities will also be close to whatever we want them to be. Okay, so if you see here, by choosing k1 and k2 properly, here this is what is the size of this thing. Error here is a n by 1 vector. Okay, n by 1 vector, n by 1 vector. In general, I can choose k1 and k2 to be n by n matrices. Okay, but for the sake of simplicity, I can just choose k1 matrix to be simply equal to a diagonal matrix, k1, k1 all the way to k1, and everything else is 0. And I can choose the k2 matrix to also be a diagonal matrix, k2, k2 all the way to 0. Okay, then I will have n linearly independent scalar equations. E1 double dot plus k1 E1 dot plus k2 E is equal to 0, and so on and so forth, all the way up to En double dot. They all have the same dynamics. This k2 E n is also equal to 0. Okay, so all of them will, by choosing k1 and k2 properly, by doing pole placement, I can get k1 and k2. I can choose such k1 and k2 that the error dynamics decays to 0 at the desired rate. Okay, with the desired lambda. Okay, if I do that, then all the errors, all the joint variables will follow the desired joint variables within a specified amount of time, decided by the real part of my the smallest eigenvalue. Okay, so you see therefore that even this very difficult problem of a nonlinear system, I mean a system exhibiting highly coupled nonlinear dynamics, can be controlled in a very straightforward manner. So what we see here is therefore that error goes to 0 as time t tends to infinity. You need not have to wait for infinite time before the error is actually 0. All you need to wait for is a time scale which is comparable to or a few multiples of the magnitude of the real part of lambda 1. That's it. And then you would have your x1 to simply track your x1d, or all the joint variables will be tracking the desired joint variables, and therefore your end effector will be moving very quickly in a time scale of this magnitude. It will be tracking your desired trajectory. Okay, so this very elegant technique of zeroing the errors that there would be in tracking a desired trajectory for this very big, complicated, nonlinear multi-body system, this is called as computed torque technique. In robotics literature. Okay, why is it called computed torque? Because the the answer is obvious. You saw that we chose a particular structure for the torque. Okay, we measured our states, the joint velocities and the joint positions, and then we chose the torque to be a function of those joint velocities, joint positions, and the errors between the desired velocities and the desired positions with the joint velocities and positions. Okay, so we computed this torque and applied that to this particular problem in order to get the error to go away as function of time. Okay, so this is called as a computed torque technique. Okay, I want to also mention in this connection that this computed torque technique is actually a subset of a more general approach to cancelling this nonlinearity and getting the error dynamics to go to zero in the desired form. Okay, and this is called as feedback linearization. So computed torque technique is one of the, is one manifestation of feedback linearization. So the control systems literature, goes beyond mechanical systems. Control systems exist in all sorts of forms. Okay, you have control systems required in chemical engineering. You have control systems required in electrical engineering. Control systems are required in mechanical engineering. So control systems therefore is a cross-disciplinary subject. As I said, we only start with the mathematical model and come up with mathematical rules to control these mathematical models. Okay, those rules are called control laws. So feedback linearization is a technique that deals with this general problem of a nonlinear system, maybe of the kind x dot is equal to f of x plus maybe g of x times u or some such thing. And how do you get this dynamic system? This is a n by 1 vector, by the way, these are all vectors. How do you get this dynamic system to track a certain desired command xd of t? This problem is dealt with in feedback linearization. Okay, computed torque is one way of implementing feedback linearization. Okay, any questions about this? Okay, as part of the homework, I would like to give this 2R manipulator problem once again and get you to implement feedback linearization or computed torque for the 2R manipulator. And I think it's going to be an interesting experience. You're going to enjoy the process of showing that such a complicated looking system with so many complicated, confusing, headache inducing cross terms and Coriolis terms and centrifugal terms and so on can be so effortlessly controlled, and the errors can be made zero in a very predictable manner by using this technique, the computed torque technique. We'll discuss that. You will see that as when you try to solve the homework problem associated with this concept. Okay, so I shall stop today's lecture here. I shall just briefly provide the motivation for what we would discuss next. If you looked at computed torque technique, if you look at the expression for the torque, okay, you see that I have to measure not only the joint positions but also the joint velocities. Okay, I need to have all the joint positions measured by me as well as the joint velocities. Now the question is, suppose I do not have ways to measure some of them. I may not be able to measure some of the joint positions. I may not be able to measure some of the joint velocities. Can I still implement this magical technique of controlling a general multi-degree of freedom nonlinear dynamic system? That's the question that we will try to answer. Okay, may not be a general nonlinear system, but we will answer it in the context of linear systems. I do not have all the states, all the elements of the state vector x1, x2, all the way up to xn available to me. What I'm able to measure is only a subset of them. Okay, so I only have sensors available which can measure perhaps the position accurately, but not the velocity, or some angular position of one link, but not the angular position of another link. So I may have these kinds of practical issues which prevent me from directly implementing state feedback. Okay, but still the benefits of state feedback are so obvious and so multifarious that I want to exploit those benefits. Okay, so by making just these measurements of a few of the state elements of the state vector, can I still implement the kind of control laws that we have been discussing so far? That's something that we will discuss in the next class. Okay, so now we shall I shall provide the solutions to the midterm problems. So before I provide the solutions, let me just pull up the answer sheet. So are you guys able to see the question paper? Sorry, not the answer sheet, question paper. Can someone confirm, please?
Yes, sir.
So in general, I mean, the class average was around 70, and most of you got more than 50, or practically every one of you got more than 50. I was quite happy with the performance. In general, I felt that most of you had understood the stuff. I could see that there were confusions. We will talk about them when we discuss the solutions. And you could have solved the paper much more, with much lesser time than you actually ended up taking if you had avoided some dead ends that you adopted, that you went along to start with. So I feel if you guys continue to perform in this particular way, turn in your assignments, and you are able to solve your next midterm 2 and your final exam also in a similar manner, then lower grades are out. Okay, I don't want to give bad grades to anybody, and the way that you guys have performed in this exam, I think you will really have to fight to get a C grade or a D grade. You have to take the initiative to get those grades if you continue to perform the way you are doing now. Okay, so all you need to do therefore is submit all your assignments, and when you prepare for your next exams, make sure that you have gone over the material, the problems that are discussed in the assignments and the problems that are discussed in the class, in the lectures, and I think you will be able to easily walk away with at least a B, if not a higher grade. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that I was reasonably happy with your performance, although it could have been better for in a few problems. You could have saved some time by avoiding some dead ends. Okay, so let us look at the first problem. We want the rotation matrix, right? Now you have seen the first problem, so let me share my go back to the projector. Okay, you can see my white sheet of paper now, right? So the first problem, we have to obtain the rotation, the homogeneous transformation matrix would be the rotation matrix, okay, of 2 with respect to 0, and the origin of the second coordinate frame with respect to 0, and then 0 and 1. Okay, so the rotation matrix R of 2 with respect to 0, if you see initially it's nothing but R of 1 with respect to 0 times R of maybe 1 prime with respect to 1 times R of 2 with respect to 1 prime. Okay, so if you do this, you find that R of 1 with respect to 0 is just Rz of theta 1, and R of 1 prime with respect to 1 is Ry of pi by 2. You have to rotate by 90 degrees about the y-axis to get this 1 prime coordinate system. Of course, I had not drawn the 1 prime coordinate system fully. I had only indicated its y-axis, but it was intended to be just an offset version of oh no, sorry, this is not R1 prime, not this. Okay, well, let us remove this term. Okay, R of 2 with respect to 1, let us just keep this. R of 2 with respect to 1, I had to first rotate by pi by 2 about the y-axis to get the the z vector of the second coordinate system to be oriented the way it was finally oriented, and then I had to rotate about the z-axis by a certain angle. It turns out that the first term, of course, will be Ry of pi by 2. To get the z-axis z1 to align with z2, it is this operation that I have to do, and then there will be Rz of minus pi by 2 plus theta 2. So this was the rotation matrix. The position vector O2 with respect to 0, there was no initial offset, right? The coordinate frames 0 and 1 were coincident. So therefore O2, O of 2 with respect to 0 was simply equal to Rz of theta 1, or in other words, R of 1 with respect to 0 times O of 2 with respect to 1. And O of 2 with respect to 1 had a very simple form. It was of the kind L1, 0, 0. Right? So, and R of 1 with respect to 0 was simply Rz of theta 1. So this completed the first part of the first problem. Okay. The second part, what was P2? Okay. This was a kind of googly. Okay. There was nothing to this problem. It was just the generalized vector P2 was simply L2 0 0, and then I have to pad it up with this 1. That's it. Okay. So you could have written it out in a few seconds. I saw that some people had taken the rotation matrix. They talked about how P2 is related to P0 by means of this homogeneous transformation matrix. They did all sorts of things. None of that was needed. This was all that there was to solving the problem. Okay, this was the first problem. The second problem, okay, I'll just open that PDF file once again. So this was a swash plate problem. Okay, so here the only difference was that the angle at which the swash plate was rotating about the Z1 axis, ZB1 axis or ZA axis was not a constant, the angular velocity was not constant, but it was changing with time. This was the only difference. Okay, so you have this same swash plate, but the angle theta z between the A and the B1 frames is changing as theta z is equal to alpha t square by 2, where alpha is a constant. So it's accelerating with constant acceleration. That's the whole thing. Obtain the bearing reactions as functions of time. Okay, so let us come back to this white sheet of paper. There was, so theta z was simply alpha t square by 2, which meant that the omega was changing as function of time, and at any time t it was equal to alpha t, which I get by differentiating this expression, omega z. Okay, and then alpha z was simply equal to alpha, which I get by differentiating this again. Now we know from the Newton-Euler equations that the moments is equal to I, sum of the moments is equal to I omega dot plus omega cross of I omega. Okay, the expression for omega cross I omega was already given in the notes. Okay, the only new term was I omega dot, and I also I told you to simply borrow it from the notes. So essentially this ended up being having three components: mx, my, mz. I don't want to write out the terms here. It's all straightforward because omega dot was simply 0 0 alpha is omega dot, and omega was simply 0 0 alpha t. And you have to substitute this, and the inertia matrix in the B1 coordinate system, it was available in the notes. Okay, so you get mx, my, mz, non-zero components for all of them. Okay, now your bearing reactions. So this was where it was slightly different. In the first case, in the case when you had only pure, I mean, if there was no angular acceleration, your mx component was 0. Okay, here because of angular acceleration, mx component is also there. My will have to be balanced by bearing reactions fx, because r cross f will result in my. So if I call this fx, then there will be a equal and opposite fx on the other side, because forces also have to be balanced, and what you get is fx times L is equal to my. The difference again from the homework or the class problem is that mx is non-zero, and to balance mx you need fy also. So fy times L should be equal to mx. That's it. Okay. What about mz? This mz is provided by the motor. Okay. Some people tried to set that equal to 0. Okay. That's not the case, because bearing reactions cannot provide mz. Mz is provided by the motor, which is spinning, which is accelerating this wash plate. Okay, so but that is not of any consequence to us. These bearings only provide forces along x and y axis, and there are the expressions for mx and my are quite straightforward. From this, you just simplify this, you get mx and my, and from that you can get fx and fy. This is it. This is the second problem. Okay. Now the third problem, we will go back to the question paper. The third problem was a simple, I thought it was a free gift. Okay, so a rate integrating gyro uses a ring of mass m and radius r. This was the catch. It was not a plate. Many of you wrote down the expression of moment of inertia for a plate. I had mentioned that it was a ring. Okay, to bring some difference. Otherwise, it's all just very obvious, obvious application of whatever was discussed in the class. The damping factor is B. Determine the spin speed omega s necessary to achieve a specified sensitivity S, measured in radians per radian. Okay, so here we note that if this gyroscope is spinning at a speed omega s, then its angular momentum is I0z omega s. Okay, and when we try to change its angular momentum, the torque I need to apply is phi dot times I0z omega s, and that we said was balanced by a damper, so B theta dot. Okay, so I0z omega s delta phi therefore was equal to B times delta theta. Okay, so sensitivity is the change in output or the instrument's output reading delta theta over delta phi. Okay, and that was equal to I0z omega s by B. Now, what is I0z for a ring? It is mr square. Okay, so therefore this is equal to S. So this is mr omega s by B has to be equal to S, which tells me that omega s has to be equal to S times B by mr square. Okay, so for those who assume that this was a disk and not not a ring, I have cut some points, but otherwise I think most people got this right. So this was the third problem. Okay, so the fourth problem, let us go back to the question paper. Yes, so this was a very strange problem in that so many of you took the wrong direction to start with. A disk of radius r and mass m is connected to a hinge by a rigid massless rod of length L. The assembly can swing freely in the vertical plane, ZA being the vertical direction. The disk is spinning about its ZB1 axis at a rate omega s relative to the rod. Okay, obtain the expression for the net angular velocity omega in the B1 represented in the B1 frame and the velocity of the center of mass Vg represented in the B1 frame. And then choose theta to be your generalized coordinate and write down the Lagrangian for the system. So this was the question. Now, what many of you did was, I was mystified. You started out by considering this free symmetric top problem. You somehow wanted to make some angular momentum, rate of change of angular momentum at some point equal to some other rate, or the net torque applied on the system to be equal to 0, and so on and so forth. But I don't know what led you in that direction. Perhaps it's the fact that you have a spinning disk here that got you to think about that free symmetric top problem, and also the fact that there is it is connected somewhere. But this was simply this is constrained, right? It can do only in the vertical plane, in the XA ZA plane. So this is just a pendulum with a spinning disk as a bob of the pendulum. That's it. Okay. So this was one point. Many of you spent a lot of time writing down some angular momentum conservation. It looked probably like maybe that reaction wheel or some such thing. I don't know what what came up in your minds when you looked at this problem. Many of you have started with the reaction wheel. Many others have looked at it as a free spinning top. All sorts of different directions have been taken, none of which were relevant. Okay. So let us obtain the angular velocity omega b1. Okay, so let us do that. So let me just draw a schematic here. Okay, so this is spinning at omega s relative to the rod. Okay, and the rod itself is changing its orientation at a rate theta dot, the orientation of the rod with respect to the vertical is theta. Okay, so this is XA, ZA. This is ZB1, this XB1. Okay, so what is the net angular velocity? Firstly, you must not get confused. Some of you wrote the angular velocity to simply be omega s. Okay, that's not the case. The omega b1 is the net angular velocity represented in the b1 coordinate system. The net angular velocity of this is not simply omega s. Okay, it's also rotating about about the vertical axis here, or in other words, the YA axis. Okay. So what is the actual angular velocity? So omega b1 is equal to theta dot. I'll just write a vector there plus omega s dot. Omega s. Okay. I'll just represent them as vectors. Both of them represented in the b1 coordinate system. That's it. Okay. Now what is theta dot represented in the b1 coordinate system? You see that, of course, you can do rotation matrices, etc. between A and B coordinate systems. Theta dot in the A coordinate system is straightforward. Theta dot in the A coordinate system is simply equal to, it's along the y-axis, right? So 0 theta dot 0. Okay, so that is the expression for theta, theta dot in the A coordinate system. In the B1 coordinate system, you have to multiply it with a certain rotation matrix. But here is where you can simply be a little more street smart. Okay. So if you see here, the y-axis of the B1 coordinate system and the y-axis of the A coordinate system are parallel to one another. So I don't need to do any rotation matrix kind of a thing to get the to resolve theta dot in the B1 coordinate system. It's going to be also the same because the y-axis is are parallel. So therefore omega b1 is therefore going to be equal to 0 theta dot 0 plus omega s represented in the b1 coordinate system. That's already given here. It's going to be along the z-axis of the b1 coordinate system. So it is going to be simply equal to 0 0 omega s. So omega b1 is simply therefore going to be equal to 0 theta dot omega s. That's it. Okay. Now what about the linear velocity of vg in the b1 coordinate system? Again, you could do rotation matrices and omega cross r and so on. But again, you can be a little street smart. I'm rotating about this point. The center of mass is moving in a circle about that point. So what will the linear velocity be? It will be aligned along the tangent to this particular radius vector, right? In other words, it will be aligned along the x-axis. Okay. And what will its magnitude be? L times theta dot. That's it. So the VB1 therefore is equal to L theta dot 0 0. That's it. There's nothing more to it. Okay. This solves the first problem.
Sir.
Yes.
Sir, in B1 frame, total angular velocity, sir, we are sitting, suppose on the pendulum, then we will not feel that swing, na, sir, because this is, I think, will come in inertial frame, omega, whatever I think.
No, this is what I said. There is a difference between omega represented in the B1 coordinate system and the relative velocity. If you are sitting on the bar, then you are not seeing, this is not what I am talking about. Okay, then you will only see this disk rotating about the ZB1 axis with omega s. We went over this multiple times. In multiple lectures, we discussed this subtle difference. P dot and PA whole dot and P dot in, PB whole dot and P dot in the B frame. We discussed that concept. If you go back to the initial lectures, you have seen that there's a subtle difference between representation of a vector and a rate of change of representation and the velocity represented in a certain reference frame. There's a difference between the two. Okay, so omega in the B1 frame is a total angular velocity represented in the B1 coordinate system. That's it. Okay, it's not just omega s.
Okay.
Okay. So now you have this. What is the expression for kinetic energy? T is equal to omega transpose I omega, half of this, plus half m magnitude of Vg square. Okay. So here, many of you got, I think except one student, they got the expressions wrong for the expansion of kinetic energy. This is equal to half of I0z omega s square. That is correct. You got that. All of you got that right. Plus there's another term, half I0x theta dot square. That very few got it right. Okay. No, almost nobody had this term. And then half m L theta dot whole square. This also everyone got it right. This other term was not there. Okay. This has got to do with this disk, disk here rotating about the, about this point at a certain angular rate theta dot. There is a certain kinetic energy associated with that. And that was missed by everyone. Okay. And you would have got it if you had applied this formula. And I here in the B1 coordinate system, B1 is, the principal coordinate. So it's just going to be equal to I0x, I0x, I0z. That's going to be IB1. Okay. So if you had done it, then you would have got this expression. but unfortunately, this expression was missing in everyone's work. Okay. So and kinetic energy, of course, as a potential energy was just mg minus mg L sin theta. Sorry, L times 1 minus, sorry, L cos theta. Sorry, this everyone got right. Okay. So again, you see that it was a fairly straightforward problem. The last problem, problem 5. Okay, let me just show the problem. So two wheels, each of mass m and radius r, are connected by a rigid massless rod. They are rolling down without slipping. The incline is tilted at an angle alpha. The wheels, the only difference, the wheels experience torques tau 1 and tau 2. Choose y as the position along the incline. Write down the Lagrangian, obtain the generalized forces, and you use Euler-Lagrange equations. So we had solved a very similar problem in the class. We had solved a single wheel running down without slipping an incline. The variables also were the same. The generalized coordinate also was the same. The only difference here is there are two wheels. That's one difference, and there are torques tau 1 and tau 2, which will contribute to a certain generalized force expression. Okay. So now let us see how to solve this problem. So we know that y is equal to minus phi r if you choose phi as that angle. Okay. And the kinetic energy of each wheel is half I0z phi dot square plus half m y dot square. That's the kinetic energy. And if you use y is equal to minus phi r, you can replace phi dot here by y dot. Okay. And 2 of that because there are two wheels. They're both identical. They're both rotating at the same rate, etc., etc. What about the potential energy? It's minus mgy sin alpha. If you choose the top of the incline as your reference, then the first wheel's potential energy will be minus mgy sin alpha. The second wheel's potential energy will be mgy plus capital L sin alpha. That's it. Okay. What is the generalized force Q? Here's again, many of you got confused. You thought of bringing in this constraint forces and so on and so forth. I think the problem was probably that you guys had not maybe solved an assignment problem of this kind, and that's why you are not comfortable enough obtaining the generalized force. But going by the definition of generalized force, you just move this whole thing by a certain amount and then compute the work done. We find that it's simply equal to minus tau 1 plus tau 2 divided by r. Okay, and the equation, once you have all of this, you can simply run it past the Euler-Lagrange machinery, and you get it to be equal to y double dot is equal to 2/3 of g sin alpha minus tau 1 plus tau 2 by r. That was it. Okay. So if you see, I started at 11:20 roughly, and by 11:40 I am done. Okay. So in 20 minutes, of course, I knew the solutions, that therefore I could write them out without too much trouble. But still, I felt that 1.5 hours was more than adequate. 3 times or 4 times the time that I took here was probably more than adequate to solve this paper. The issue I felt was that some of you took wrong directions. So maybe all you had to do was think calmly and don't try to do pattern matching. The moment you see a spinning disc or something, don't assume that it's a problem about a gyroscope or a reaction wheel or some such thing. So just look at the problem and solve it. That was one thing that I felt. The second thing was you could try to be a little street smart. Okay. Rather than taking the right royal route all the time. Sometimes the problems are, the solution is right there. Okay, it's staring you in the face. So you can simply write it down. For example, the angular velocity expression in the B1 coordinate system and the velocity expression, you didn't have to do a lot of multiplication of rotation matrices and this and that and so on. That can often be confusing. So you just had to inspect the figure and you had the answer right there. Okay, you could do it the other way around also, and I think you would have still got it right. But somehow I think you guys got confused with the coordinate system or some such thing. Many people got this problem wrong. So this is it. So are there any particular questions about the solutions? But overall, I think I was happy with your performance. I think if you keep it up, I don't think you'll have any trouble walking away at least with a B, if not a higher grade. in this course. Are there any questions? Subhadeep Sahu has a question.
Yes, sir. For the first question, sir,
Yes.
I have done means taking T02 as a T10 and multiplying by T21. So means so that's also can be done.
That's also a perfectly valid thing. So you want to apply this rule for the homogeneous transformation method. That's also perfectly fine.
Yes, sir. Means both are same. That will get me the same result, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes. Sir. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other question? Okay. If there are no further questions, we shall stop today's lecture at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir.